Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, price gouging, the 2020 election, civil unrest, reform or replace. Let's get to it.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Welcome back to the show. Well, joining me is Danene Sorace. She's the mayor of Lancaster City in Pennsylvania, I might add. There are a couple of Lancasters elsewhere. Mayor, we had you on a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted to bring you back because there are a couple of things I want to talk about, particularly the business of civil unrest and reform and replace. But you expressed concern, legitimate concern, over, getting the businesses, particularly in downtown Lancaster, but not just in the city and the county and elsewhere, open. How does that stand at the moment?
So I would say that we are making progress in reopening. I think that businesses are, still struggling around getting access to PPE and making sure that they have all of the safety protocols in place. And so many of our businesses across Lancaster County and the Commonwealth are small businesses, 20 or fewer people. And so I think that where business is able to come back, it's coming back. I think that there are other sectors here in Lancaster that have to do with entertainment and, just cultural events, both in for-profit and not-for-profit, that are continuing to struggle.
Yeah, I mean, one of the concerns are some of the small businesses just won't reopen, and Lancaster City in particular has a very healthy and vibrant downtown. Businesses close, small shops. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the expectation is some won't reopen. How serious a concern is that for you?
It's a very serious concern because it goes to the heart of the vitality of downtown Lancaster and also the vitality of our neighborhoods. And I think not only is it a question of whether or not our businesses and our small business owners and employees feel comfortable returning, but also the degree to which there is consumer demand and consumer confidence to come downtown, both in terms of their own paychecks and what they have in terms of discretionary spending, but also in terms of public health and their feeling of safety.
Right. Let's move on to another subject. Let's talk a little bit about what's been described as civil unrest, the protest based on what happened to the horrible murder of George Floyd. Describe the demonstrations that have been, fairly frequent in Lancaster. I'll let you describe them. I have my own view of it, but you followed it and know it very well.
Well, first I want to say that these demonstrations that have been happening across the country are yes, in direct result to the death of George Floyd at the hands of white police officers, or the knee, as it were. And many other instances that were either directly related or indirectly related to law enforcement. Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. These events require all of us to take action. And I think that there was an incredible number of, last Saturday, a week ago, was the first protest in the city of Lancaster, and it was organized by two young people affiliated with a Black Lives Matter chapter. I don't know how formally organized it is, but they made that happen, and it has been a groundswell of outpouring here in our community. And those protests went on from Saturday to Saturday, essentially. Right. And by and large, they were peaceful. There were people here that were intending to cause harm. Our protesters really deserve a lot of credit in terms of, and our community leaders in terms of picking up bricks.
All right.
And
before I let you go, I've got to get to the important subject of reform or replace. There's a big debate about what to do with the police. I think everybody knows what went on in Milwaukee, where they voted to replace the police and go to some kind of community policing, I'll call it that. Many Democratic mayors say, no, not replace, reform. There are big changes that can be made. What's your position on that?
My position is that we've been working towards making reforms. I spoke to a police officer yesterday who talked about the progressive nature of Lancaster City policing, and we have more work to do. And so there's general understanding, broad understanding that changes need to be made. And I also just want to nod to the fact that we're talking about systemic racism, and criminal justice and policing is one component of that. And we know that if we address poverty and other issues related to we will make progress.
But overall, you're for reforming as opposed to replacing. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, and I think that in part because I don't know what I'm responding to relative to reform. I mean, even Milwaukee City Council has made that determination, but they have not specified what that reform is going to look like. Or that replacement. Sure.
Well, look, I want to thank you for coming on the program. You're always welcome. All right, coming up, the Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, joins me, and we have much to talk about.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Joining me is Josh Shapiro. He's the Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania. General Shapiro, welcome to the program. Welcome back.
Good to be back, Terry. I hope you're healthy and safe, my friend.
Back at you, as they say. All right, we have a number of topics to talk about. I want to start out with price gouging. You've gotten thousands, I think, of emails and calls into your offices about price gouging. Imagine this. Hand sanitizers from $2 to $19. And I won't even get into the cost of these face masks that have risen dramatically in some cases. All right, what's the latest? Give us an update, price gouging.
Well, here's the deal, Terry. The moment that the governor issued his disaster declaration, we put a special hotline or email hotline in place, price gouging at attorneygeneral.gov, because we thought there might be some people trying to take advantage of good Pennsylvanians during this time. Terry, as of today, we've received over 5,000 tips for price gouging, and we have followed up on every single one of them. Typically, the business, when we call them on it, will cut it out, or they'll educate us as to why the information we received may not have been accurate. In about 500 cases, we've issued cease and desist letters, and in about a dozen cases, we've had to take it to a next legal step to compel them to stop. Here's the thing. I will not allow anyone to take advantage of a Pennsylvanian during this pandemic, during this crisis. We're going to protect Pennsylvanians, and that's exactly what we've done. I will tell you that in addition to combating price gouging, on the consumer protection front, when we've heard about scams, when we've heard about people being taken advantage of, we've stepped in. And Terry, since this disaster declaration by the governor in that first week of March, we've been able to return $1.5 million directly back into the pockets of the people of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, wow. And you have something called the Price Gouging Act. Is that something that, briefly, tell us?
Yeah, look, it's the law in the books that allows me to do this work to protect Pennsylvanians. In a nutshell, here's what it says. That if a business, and let me be clear, the business can be the retailer on the street corner, it can be the website that you buy something from, or it can be the distributor or the manufacturer. If they're charging a price that is more than 20% greater than the price they were charging prior to the disaster declaration, that is considered price gouging. Now, look, we recognize in some cases, particularly with food stores, there are some, supply and demand issues which may cause pricing to go up. We've been working with the grocery store folks and others to make sure that we're being sensitive to those issues as well.
All right, let's move on. I want to talk about your coalition to end law enforcement officers unknowingly hire people who've had, problems in their past. You got the Pennsylvania State Troopers on board with this, the association, I should say. Explain that.
Look, Terry, I think that there are thousands of Pennsylvanians taking to the streets peacefully and righteously protesting and calling for meaningful reform. And I think we need to listen to them. But here's what I'm not into. I'm not into just getting behind a microphone and screaming and yelling about it until the news cycle moves on. I'm about making real change and doing so by building coalitions. So actually, about 6 or 7 months ago, I brought a coalition of law enforcement leaders and legislative Black Caucus to my office in Harrisburg prior to the pandemic and sat down to say, where can we find common ground on police accountability and police reform, long before anyone in this nation knew the name, as we do now, of George Floyd. We started making progress on that, and just last week I was able to announce that coalition has formed around the idea of creating a database of complaints against police officers so that when a police officer tries to leave one department and go to another, their record goes with them. Right. So that local police chief or town councilor, whomever's making the hire, has the benefit of all that information. And the unique thing about this is we built a coalition that includes the following: the two major police chiefs in Pennsylvania, Philly and Pittsburgh, the Municipal Police Chiefs Association, a number of their members, the Pennsylvania State Troopers Association, the statewide FOP, the FOP of Philadelphia, the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association, and the Legislative Black Caucus and others clamoring for reform. This is really the first reform we've been able to build a coalition behind. I'm proud of the fact that we were able to do that work. And look, this is a down payment on the kinds of reforms we need in our system to make it more just and fair and equitable.
Well, that just makes common sense. It doesn't seem overly complicated to me for folks to get that kind of information. We're going to run to a break. When we come back, your office is also working to protect workers, and there's a particular case that I want to talk about. Back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
My guest is Josh Shapiro. He's the Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, and we're talking about a number of important subjects that his office has been dealing with. Well, General Shapiro, Instacart to protect workers. That's the headline, I think, and you're going to explain that to our viewers.
Yeah, look, we're dealing with twin crises in Pennsylvania right now. Obviously, the public health pandemic, but second is the resulting economic devastation and job loss. Look, Terry, since this pandemic began, 1 in 3 Pennsylvanians have lost a job. Now, while some of them will get back to work, many of them were left unprotected and don't have a position to go back to now. And many more people are going into what's called the gig economy. They're driving groceries, for example, or restaurant deliveries at companies like Grubhub or Instacart. And those gig workers, as they're known, they are among the least protected workers in this nation. And so I've been working directly with those gig companies to offer greater protections for their workers. And I've negotiated deals with both Grubhub and Instacart, which have become national models rolled out across the country, that gives workers paid sick days, that gives them the ability to be paid if they have to stay home and care for a child, that gives them access to telemedicine and other things that they need. These are, I think, groundbreaking agreements that can be models for others. And it also highlights the need for us to do more for these gig workers, particularly as people migrate into those kinds of jobs, having lost the other jobs they had. This is going to be an area that we're going to need real worker reform, and I'm proud that we're leading on this issue.
All right, I want to get to one last subject before I let you go. As you know, we had the mayor of Lancaster on earlier, and the big issue is with the police. Do you reform? And I think everybody, Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, liberals, there's kind of uniformity that there are reforms that can be made. But the other option is to completely replace the police by setting up some community policing. And more Democrats are now saying reform, reform, reform. Vice President Biden, obviously the Democratic nominee for president, has said reform, 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 not replace. What's the position of the Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania on that subject?
Yeah, I've been clear about this for years. We need more reform. I do not support defunding the police or the calls to defund the police. I think we have to recognize what people are saying, and that is they want more accountability, and they want to make sure, for example, as I've been saying for years, let's treat drug addiction as a disease, not a crime, right? Let's invest more in drug and alcohol treatment. Let's invest more in housing. Let's invest more in education. If we do those things, you've heard me say this many times before, fewer people will cross my desk as the chief law enforcement officer of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We have got to make sure that we invest in those other things, but we also need to have strong, accountable policing. That's one of the reasons why, as we talked just a moment ago, we need to have hiring practices reform, and that coalition we built is going to help usher in what I think is the first real meaningful reform we've seen in a while. Yeah.
The good news from my point of view is it seems like in Pennsylvania there's going to be a special session. The Speaker of the House, Mike Turzai, who's leaving the office, but he came out in favor of a special session to deal with crime. It looks like there may be a consensus between Democrats and Republicans, not just on the need for reform, but on some of the key elements that will make up the reform. Now, I'm not suggesting there won't be differences, as you know, but it looks like there's a large area of possible agreement.
Absolutely. Look, I can tell you that the initiative I've been working on for months, again, making sure that the employment history files travels with that police officer, so you're not passing a bad police officer from one jurisdiction to the other. That bill that we've been working on for months is going to get marked up in committee on Monday. And there is broad consensus and agreement in both the House and the Senate that this should be one of, if not the first pieces of legislation move forward. Look, this is a moment in time to hear the cries from the people of Pennsylvania who are peacefully protesting, and for lawmakers to get to work constructively and thoughtfully around areas that are going to have a meaningful impact. This type of registry is one of those areas. I look forward to continuing to partner with the forces that want to see real change go forward.
Well, look, I want to thank you for coming on the program. You're welcome at any time. All right, coming up, we're going to take a look at it wouldn't be Pennsylvania Newsmakers if we didn't take a look at the 2020 elections. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
All right, election 2020. Joining me is John Cole. He's the managing editor of PoliticsPA. Welcome, Mr. Cole.
Thanks very much for having me, Terry. How's it going?
All right, I want to get right to it. 1.8 million people applied for mail-in ballots. About 1.4 million or so actually submitted them. We could have triple that. And still, as you and I chat, there's a debate over who won, because the ballots haven't been totally counted, who won elections. What is that going to look like in the fall, and what kinds of changes do we make in order to ensure that we know who won elections, without waiting a week or two?
Well, talk about unprecedented times, Terry. The fact that Governor Tom Wolf extended mail-in ballots for 6 candidates for an extra week to tally these ballots and some of the more populated counties in the state, and that's just for the primary. Like you mentioned, it's expected that in the presidential election, we're going to have a significant amount more of mail-in ballots. And quite frankly, the days of just finding out all the results on election night for a state like Pennsylvania, it's not realistic. It's going to take time to tally all these votes. Some counties deserve a lot of credit, like Allegheny County had a lot of mail-in ballots, yet they were able to count it in a relatively timely fashion. Having said that, counties like Philadelphia have been a bit slower in this process. So it's fair to say that we don't know exactly what it's going to look like in November. But one thing is for sure is that there's no way we're going to know all the results on election night.
Well, the one thing it seems to me is they have to be done securely. It has to be done without fraud. But we have to start voting them, counting them, I should say, before 8 p.m. on November 3rd, election night.
Absolutely. And I'm sure a lot of counties are going to have to think about that moving forward, because the amount of question marks going into the general election, I think a lot of people would be confused and bothered if it takes days, if not weeks, if states like Pennsylvania aren't called. So I'm sure there will be adjustments made by the time of the general, although we don't know exactly what that's going to look like quite yet.
All right, let's talk about the presidential election in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is one of the pivotal battleground states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida. Let's throw in Arizona and North Carolina. The Real Clear Politics average as we speak, and there hadn't been a lot of Pennsylvania polls, gives Joe Biden a 3.3 percentage point lead. Give us an update. Now, they're not doing in-person campaigning. That's likely to start once the state goes completely, I think it's green, if I understand Governor Wolf's three-part determination about what should happen with the state opening up. Presidential election in Pennsylvania.
So again, due to the coronavirus pandemic, the whole campaigning as we know it really was different in 2020. But if you've noticed, in recent weeks, even though campaigns haven't been able to have their typical big style rallies, the presidential candidates have made it a point to come to Pennsylvania in recent weeks. In May, President Donald Trump spoke at a medical equipment facility in the Lehigh Valley. Former Vice President Joe Biden has made multiple addresses in Philadelphia. His campaign's also headquartered here. And you also have Vice President Mike Pence making a trip to the state as well in Western PA, leading a campaign-style event that's kind of small, coupled with other official stops on behalf of the White House.
But let me just jump in. But these aren't normal. Normally, there would be multiple events, and they're relatively few. And that's likely to increase, correct?
Absolutely. But again, we don't know what these events are going to look like. We don't know if President Donald Trump's going to be able to have those rallies where he packed those arenas. One of the more recent ones was in December in Hershey, sold out, that arena. I don't know if he's going to be able to do that, at least in the near future. So they'll still be campaigning in the state, but we don't know exactly how many people will be able to attend these events.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's still an open question. Look, I want to thank you for coming on the program. The fact of the matter is Pennsylvania is a pivotal state, and we're going to see not the candidates and their surrogates because of the importance of the state. All right, thanks for watching Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well. We'll see you next week.